and welcome to We Need to Talk About Sunday, the podcast, video, live chat show thing, where we talk about what happened on Sunday morning at Romsey, or the last Sunday morning at Romsey Methodist Church. I am Jason.
And I'm Joe.
And we are joined this evening by Rev Kate Cambridge, who led our service on Sunday. Hi, Kate.
Hi. Good to be here.
Great to have you with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to start off, Kate, this evening by just sort of saying welcome. Thanks for preaching on Sunday. And as a newbie as a new member of Romsey Methodist Church, I thought I'd ask, I haven't seen you around as much as obviously some of the other preachers. I wondered, who are you and where have you come from?
Yeah, well, I live in Eastleigh.
Yep.
So I'm a Methodist minister in Eastleigh, and I live here with my husband and my 3 children. But I'm not actually very far from home because Romsey Methodist Church was the place that I grew up. So I went through the Sunday school there, had a lovely couple from the church used to encourage me and give me a lift every week to church and kept me in the faith, if you like. Mm-hmm. And it was at Romsey Methodist Church that I first felt the call to be a local preacher. And then, of course, went on to be a Methodist minister. So for me, Romsey Methodist Church, even though it looks so different now, it's always like coming home. And there's still faces I remember, people who remember me, but lots of new ones as well, which is great. But that's who I am.
That's lovely. Well, thanks. And yeah, thanks for coming and speaking to us. We were obviously recapping Ruth. And like we often sort of question people on our podcast, so basically ask you why the theme, why were you stuck with Ruth, and what was your message about, really?
Stuck with Ruth.
So I was stuck with Ruth because I was approached some time ago and asked if I would take the harvest service at Romsey, and because one of the themes that you've been working through and from time to time is women in the Bible, I was asked if I would do a service on Ruth, harvest service. And I said yes very quickly because I always like coming to Romsey. And then as the time drew nearer, I did wonder how I was going to do Ruth and harvest. And we also felt it was very important to talk about climate change with COP26 coming up. And it was also an all-in service with lots of songs and prayers, and how I was going to do that in 45 minutes. So that's how I got Ruth. And it was a challenge. But actually, it was brilliant because Ruth is only 4 chapters long. And I did say on Sunday to people, please go away and read Ruth, because I can't do it justice in a few minutes on a Sunday morning. But I really enjoyed the opportunity to look at Ruth, to look at an introduction to one of my commentaries on Ruth, and to learn some more about it. And I think it's amazing because in the Old Testament, we have a lot of really strong male characters. And of course, we've got this patriarchal society where the man is the head of the household, and where the woman is either a daughter or she's then married and she's somebody's wife. And the women don't always have that chance to speak for themselves or to stand out in such a way. And yet in Ruth, the story is so much about the women. The menfolk die very early in the story. And you've got a story of 3 women and 2 women, Naomi and Ruth, and their journey, and how Ruth impacts Naomi's life in such a positive way, and how Naomi moves from feeling like she's lost everything to, at the end of the story, having a new heir in Ruth's son Obed, and being told that Ruth is more to her than 7 sons. Now, when sons were so highly valued in that culture, Ruth has that amazing status just because of her faithfulness to Naomi and her actions throughout the story. And I think that's really a really strong message and really encouraging.
So I often ask the preacher if that's if there's a way of sort of so if you miss the service on Sunday perhaps, and maybe you don't even have the time to go back and rewatch it, but if people are just looking for that one sort of sentence as to, you know, in a nutshell, what's the takeaway message in it? Is it about that faithfulness? Is that?
I think it's very difficult to have an individual takeaway message. But what struck me, I think, is this is about one family. It's about Naomi, who's lost her husband, and it's about her daughter-in-law, who's also lost a husband, and it's about how Ruth's faithfulness to her mother-in-law actually brings redemption and salvation at the end of the story for Naomi, but more so than Naomi, because we have Ruth in the line of Jesus, and named as one of the people who's in the ancestry of Jesus. I think it's a reminder to us that if a foreign woman from a different religion who converts can have that impact just through everyday faithfulness, actually, any of us could have a story like Ruth, because we're all involved in that amazing journey with God, where we are used where we are, just in our everyday actions of kindness. No one's going to make a video or a film or write a book about me helping a mum out on the way to school, or looking after somebody's child for them when they have to go to hospital, or whatever it is. But actually, we almost could, because we are all also writing the story of God's involvement in the world through us and through being faithful. So if a foreign woman can have that impact, that she's named in the genealogy of Jesus, then actually the same is true for any of us. Don't look down on yourself. You can have as much of an impact as the person next to you.
I find that really interesting, thinking you sort of talk about us being about family, because if you sort of think of it as Jesus being our way into God's family, I guess, of being our brother, and that then actually this story is about someone from our, in a sort of spiritual way, our ancestor, aren't they? This is the family of the church through history. It's really interesting to think about it that way. That it makes it feel a bit more, I guess, closer to home, rather than it being this story that happened in a foreign land. This is something that happened in Jesus's family history that sort of kind of becomes our family history.
Yeah, that's right. It's really important to us. It's not just a story that was told a long time ago with a nice message, but actually it's key to where we find ourselves because of Ruth's privileged position in that family line.
Perhaps one of the most, or one of the more relatable Old Testament sections, because there's a lot that's slightly tricky to relate with in terms of the Old Testament. I mean, and I suppose this is definitely a story that hits close to home, I suppose.
Yeah,
it feels more relatable.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Well, that's interesting, because that's interesting from thinking back to local preacher training, and that is, if you go back to kind of the really old festivals in the Old Testament, and like Passover and that kind of, actually it is really centered in family, that it is really a faith that it's a faith you have at home, not necessarily a faith that happens in temples and exciting places. It's a family faith, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't think we realize quite how important family was and is in that culture. It's so much more important today, because of course today we're a lot more about the nuclear family, and we can actually become quite insular, but I think those families, actually the whole extended family, is really important too. So the fact that when Ruth has a son towards the end, that brings hope for her whole family, because now the family line is not ending when Naomi's husband and 2 sons died. That's so important, the continuity of that family line. And it's normally through, of course, a son. So that's why Naomi needed one of her sons to provide an heir. But of course, early on in the story, she loses her husband. And then when she's moved to Moab, she loses her 2 sons. But Ruth is the one who brings the hope, because she marries a relative, Boaz, and has a son who is considered to be in the line of Ruth's first husband, to continue that family line. And that's, we don't understand that quite so much, but that was so important then.
Yeah. I just wondered, this idea of the Moabs and the Israelites, and I wondered whether you could kind of give us a little bit more sort of cultural, historical padding around for those who might not sort of have that historical knowledge in terms of the time and what the world looked like then and there.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say to those people who think I've got all this amazing knowledge, I just had a commentary. Because I think sometimes people think the person at the front knows it all,
Sure.
and they maybe look at us and think we're so wise. And I like people thinking I'm wise, but actually,
Yeah,
I
stop
read a
dodging the
commentary-
question, Kate.
Yeah,
Go for it.
yeah.
No,
So I
okay.
read a commentary that pointed this out to me. But it's really interesting because you've got Naomi and her husband Elimelech moving to Moab because there's a drought in the land and they need to move to get food. But in the story of when the Israelites leave Egypt, and of course Moses leads them out of Egypt to freedom, but when they're hungry and they're in need of food, the Moabites refuse to help them and refuse to give them food. So the Moabites are considered to be a people cursed by God. And yet you have Elimelech and Naomi leaving their wider family and their society with all the ties, all the important ties there, the people of God, they're moving away to a place where the people are considered cursed. And they're going to find food among a people who refused to give them food when they most needed it. And it's really fascinating that Moab is the place that they decide to go. And on top of that, their sons marry Moabite women from a apparently cursed group of people, and people of a different religion who probably had multiple gods. And yet that's how the story begins. It's really fascinating.
Do you think that the Moabites would have been quite hostile to them? They probably wouldn't have. They wouldn't have felt comfortable welcoming them in so comfortably, I suppose.
That's a really interesting question, and I think my answer would be I don't really know how much enmity there would have been from the Moabite side at the time, and I don't know what migration was like at the time in that period. But I do find it fascinating when we think about migration today, because we can have a lot of negativity around conversations around migrants and immigrants. And of course, if I can talk about what's been going on in the news in recent days, after a lot of rhetoric talking about the importance of keeping the numbers down and keeping immigrants out, we're now trying to change the laws to bring more people in from overseas because we find we need them to fill jobs. So it's fascinating. But yes, when we think about the negativity around immigration today, they were economic migrants, the type of people that some people frown upon. But actually, they moved out of necessity. And that's the same today. It would have been uncomfortable to move somewhere like Moab. You're living among a people whose religion and are people who are special to you, and you're moving out of that comfort zone to an unknown place, out of desperation. And I suppose that really hit home for me, because we can be so negative about people who find themselves in need when we're privileged. And I think this challenges us not to be so judgmental in our views.
I've got and on that challenge note, I've got a challenging question coming from Gareth, which I'll pop on the screen. But yeah, it's an interesting question that we've just thrown at you there, Kate. So don't feel the need to. It's an interesting, yeah.
So are you going to leave the question up on the screen so that I remember what I'm answering and I don't walk off halfway through?
Oh, I can get rid of it. It's fine. I can just click the button and it's gone.
So yeah, I think Ruth is really interesting because there's that tension there. Because on the one hand, you've got the group of women who are now sort of Naomi and Ruth are now making their own way without the men, but you've also got in there the fact that Boaz is seen as the one who will bring that security to Ruth and to Naomi. And that interesting transaction where Boaz, as kinsman redeemer, redeems the land and kind of purchases Ruth as part of the bargain. And of course, that's not how Boaz sees that. But Boaz is stepping up to redeem the property. But yeah, I think that's always going to be uncomfortable, because I think many of us are really uncomfortable with that aspect of the society and how things worked. And so there's that tension, because some people say there's a way you can read Ruth in a very feminist vein, but then you come across something like that. And that's problematic, because yes, the women are still considered to be the ones who are, acquired and property. that's really problematic. And I don't think we can get away from that, because this is a totally different culture. And the radical elements of that still don't negate the fact that that is in there.
And I know you and I talked about it briefly on Sunday, that there's a difference, I think, between a patriarchal society that we may or may not be in now, that's a kind of archaic or a hangover, or however you want to think about that, to a patriarchal society out of, not necessity, but I guess accident of history, that it was a brutal time and they were at war, it seems all the time when you read in the Bible, and it's about survival, is about strength, physical strength, brute force, and sometimes being very ruthless. With terrible pun, but that's what it takes for Israel to exist in that time, and of course that's very different for us now. I personally find that hard to kind of reconcile, but I could imagine that it would be much easier, even if you didn't like it, to realize that actually that's a way, the way for the society to continue for the time being, as barbaric as it was.
This is it. It was a very different time, and actually, this was a way in which Ruth and Naomi needed security. Although there is an interesting question, of course, because we see Naomi as this almost destitute woman with Ruth, and they are certainly desperate for Ruth to go out and to do the gleaning in the field behind the workers. They are desperate for food, and yet they have this parcel of land that can then be sold to Boaz. So there are questions over that and how that fits in with the story. But yes, it was a different time, and of course, so the women did need that level of security. However, reflecting on that, of course, we do have women in the Old Testament who don't follow that norm. And I was thinking, the book of Ruth is written around the time of the judges. And the time of the judges, we're told, is a time when everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And it's depicted as a time that's quite lawless and a very violent time. One of the judges, of course, is someone called Deborah, isn't it? So there are female judges who actually rule the land. So we do need to be careful, not just
yes.
We can make things very black and white because we don't understand the nuances, I think, in that culture. It's not always the same way for all women.
No, that's very true. Yeah, of course. I mean, talking about the kind of, I always kind of get very Game of Thrones kind of visions of it, kind of that, when you talk about people doing what was right in their own eyes, and this kind of odd sort of feudal kind of system they've got going on. But it does
lost me on Game of Thrones, Jason.
I'm afraid. but it's you watch Game of Thrones and it's barbaric and it's horrible, and yet all these people are kind of, that's normal for them. And I think it's I think personally I found that a very interesting way to reflect on Old Testament history and kind of understand that we're a bit sheltered, aren't we, in our worldview and understanding of the harshness of the situation.
Yeah, it's true.
Particularly in this country as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I wondered, Kate, if you think that we should be sort of responding to Ruth, the story of Ruth, differently as different genders.
I take it, so you're obviously picking up on the fact that I'm talking about these strong women in Ruth.
Well, yeah, I just, I think, we're specifically highlighting, women in the Bible, and particularly, and I just thought, well, it is the message to us today different for the genders that we are today? I mean, I really don't know. I'm not sort of, I don't feel like it's a trap or anything. I don't know.
I suppose that's a really interesting question, because quite clearly, for those who hadn't noticed, I'm coming to this as a woman.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it feels like to read that story as a man.
Sure.
I do know how liberating it is to read it as a woman and to see this strong woman in Ruth. And in a society where sons are so prized, at the end of the reading, we have the women at the end of the chapter, the book, that would be.
Yeah.
We have the women gathering around Naomi and saying how blessed she is, and saying that Ruth is more to her than 10 sons. So that's an amazing value placed on Ruth. But you do, of course, as well have Boaz in the story, don't you? And Boaz is somebody who is clearly wealthy. He owns his own fields. He's got the workers coming in to bring in the harvest. And when he visits the field, he notices that Ruth is there, that there's a woman who's gleaning. And he actually looks out for Ruth, and he makes sure that she stays in that field where she'll be safe. That the men leave her alone because she's very vulnerable as a single woman. And more than that, Jason's just been muted. And more than that, he makes sure that they actually take extra barley from the sheaves and leave that on the ground for Ruth to provide for her. So you've got a very strong male character who is following that Levitical law, that he needs to look out for those who were poor among them and to provide for them. So it's by no means negative to men, just because it's lifting up the value of women.
But so on Joe's point, though, what I thought was interesting is because I was rereading through it, and I don't know about anyone else, but Boaz comes across as quite enigmatic in how how it's written. We followed Ruth and Naomi, and we get an idea of their backstory and their ups and downs, and we are, as looking at it as a story, we're emotionally invested in them. Boaz is a bit of an unknown, and so I guess when I'm reading it, my instinct, having read up to meeting Boaz, is to still be looking at the story from Ruth and Naomi's point of view, not from Boaz's as a man. And that might not be the most helpful way to think about it, but it was just a thing that sort of came to me as I was kind of reading it, that I wonder if that's intentional in the authorship of, well, it's not quite as important that we understand Boaz. It's much more important that we understand Ruth and Naomi and their journey.
I think it certainly is a story. Yeah, it is Ruth and Naomi's story, isn't it? But Boaz comes into. I think it does read like that. And there are plenty of stories, aren't there, in the Bible that we read automatically from a certain viewpoint, which makes it quite fascinating, actually, to approach it from a different viewpoint and maybe look at it from the viewpoint of Boaz. There is something really interesting in this book towards the end, because you remember I talked about the importance of having a son. And how when Ruth marries Boaz, she will have a son that can carry on the family line and would be considered as a son for, I think it was Perez, her husband. But then when you look at the genealogy at the end, Perez isn't mentioned. Boaz is mentioned. So there's kind of like almost a discrepancy, really, between what they've said is happening. And Boaz is the one who is mentioned as the father. Because clearly he is the father, but Obed should really be considered in the family line of Elimelech. Just an interesting little point to throw out there.
Yeah. And I suppose you didn't get the chance with only 45 minutes to have to fit in all of that in one go.
And don't get me started on the threshing floor scene in chapter 3. There's so many different takes on that and what really goes on the threshing floor that we might not want to go into just now, but that's an interesting one too. Sure.
Well, we can if you want to.
My question was going to be: is there anything that you really didn't have time to mention on Sunday that you'd like to throw in?
I'm not sure the threshing floor was the bit I wanted to be able to mention on Sunday. There are different takes on Ruth. I think so. Some people read Ruth just as a straight story, and the fact that Ruth has been faithful and she happened to come across the field that Boaz is, Boaz owns, and so she happens to then, come into that situation where she marries Boaz, and some people read it as a lot more carefully calculated by Ruth.
Okay.
As the fact that actually this was very well planned, that Ruth just happened to be in the field that Boaz just happened to be the owner of. And clearly you've got Naomi taking control when she realizes that Boaz is a relative and could be the person who marries Ruth and becomes the kinsman redeemer. And
I find that hard to sort of imagine, because it's quite clear how desperate they are. So I don't know, maybe that's how I don't read it that way, because they were obviously so desperate that they completely upturned their lives.
Yeah, I think I like to read it. I think I would go for the straight reading myself. And God is at work in the fact that Ruth finds herself in the field that Boaz happens to be the owner of. And then clearly Naomi does intervene and encourage Ruth to go to Boaz. And of course they do marry. But of course, even if Ruth had gone to the field knowing that it was Boaz's field, there's no less. God doesn't just work in one particular way. I think it doesn't. I don't think it takes away from the story if you have another reading of it. But that wasn't necessarily the main thing I wanted to get from Ruth when I was looking at it on Sunday. I think I managed to touch on most of the things that that I thought were important with Ruth. It really grips me, this the emphasis on inclusion and the challenging of prejudices and the lack of expectation. Naomi had no expectation of Ruth. Ruth went back with her to Bethlehem, but Naomi went back there and said, "Call me Mara," which means bitter, because the Lord's taken everything away. Am I here now? I think I dropped out for a minute. Yeah.
So did I.
I think we all did, yeah. The fact that Ruth is there doesn't mean anything to Naomi at the beginning, because she's just a woman. And then I'm going to keep talking and thinking you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, good. And then by the end, of course, her view has been transformed. Sometimes we don't believe that God can work because the circumstances are too ordinary, or we don't really see the blessings we have in the people and situations around us. And we need to open our eyes. God is at work. We just need to see it. We need to look for where God is at work, blessing us and blessing those around us. And also be that blessing to others, just in our ordinary lives. You don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to have a high-powered job or a job that puts you in front of people. You don't have to work at all. You don't have to have an exciting life to be used by God, because you still meet people and you're still touching people's lives in the interactions you have with them. I'd like to tell actually a quick story if I can.
Of course, yeah.
I remember when I was living in Winchester, and I was the minister of the Methodist Church Week in Winchester. I had a security alarm, and there was a particular company who used to check the security alarms of the different manses. And so this man came to the house and he checked the security alarm, and I chatted with him and it was nice. And then he went. And it was some years later, a friend who lived in Manse had somebody come and service her security alarm, and somehow they got talking. And he said, "Do you know what? I'm not religious, but if there's anyone who's ever made me think about being a Christian, it's this lady I met." And he described this lady. And my friend said, "That's Kate. That's my friend." And there was something about that encounter that made him consider the Christian faith. Now, I didn't talk to him about Jesus. I didn't tell him the way to salvation. I don't think I did anything at all. And that wasn't me. That was God working in that man's life through me just offering him a cup of tea and having a chat. I'm honestly still blown away by that. And I think none of us know, but all of us have had that impact on other people, because it's God working through us. We just have to be available and be ourselves. And I'm so encouraged by that. And I don't say that to blow my own trumpet, because I was just ordinary old me. There was nothing in my mind special about that encounter, apart from he was a nice chap and we chatted. But God was at work. So let's have more faith in God being at work in the everyday.
Well, and in us as well. I mean, you say the ordinary old you, but none of us is the ordinary old us when God is involved. Are we? I guess that's the And
I think the hazard is, or the people look at somebody like me, particularly when I've got a bit of plastic around my neck, my dog collar on a Sunday, and they see me as maybe someone different and think that God uses people like that and not me. But I'm no different, absolutely no different to anybody. It just happens that I was called to be a preacher and a minister rather than a cab driver or a gardener or a cleaner or a teacher. No different, no more spiritual or righteous than anyone else. I'm constantly amazed that I find myself where I do, because I'm just so ordinary. And I think we all see ourselves, or a lot of us, some of us may have more inflated views of ourselves. A lot of us see ourselves as ordinary and think that's not me. And
Yeah.
it is, because it's not about us. It's
Yeah.
about God using us. And none of us are ordinary, as you said, Jason, when God's involved.
I have no questions to follow that up.
To be honest, I think that's a lovely, place to end it, because we need to try and be on time, because Joe's got to dash. But yes, I think that's a lovely sentiment a lovely message to end on. Actually, thank you, Kate.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to come on and having a good chat. I think that was
been fun,
really...
a bit scary, but fun.
That was great. I've learned a lot, actually. Thank you.
Let's hope some of it was right. It's on the internet now.
Doesn't matter. It was said with confidence. That's all that matters.
This, I say this. You just go back and look at some of the others. What's left on the internet? This is great, really good. But yes, thank you so much. I guess I'll end with a prayer, and then we'll go. Yeah.
Great.
Super duper.
Father God, we thank you for Kate and the message that she brought to us on Sunday. And the reminder just now of who we are and the difference that we can make because of you. And I pray, Lord, that you would help us to find ways to be available and to be present, and to perhaps point people towards you, Lord, even if we're not aware of it. Amen.
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 Thank you all. I'll click the big red end button, and I will be back another time. I hope.
We will.
Thank you
Kate.
so much.
Thanks for watching, folks.
Cheerio.